hot, thought the Parisians. The warm air of spring. It was night. They were at war, and there was an air raid. But dawn was near, and the war far away. The first to hear the hum of the siren were those who couldn't sleep. The ill and bedridden, mothers with sons at the front, women crying for the men they loved. To them, it began as a long breath, like air being forced into a deep sigh. It wasn't long before its wailing filled the sky. It came from afar, from beyond the horizon, slowly, almost lazily. Those still asleep dreamed of waves breaking over pebbles, a March storm whipping the woods, a herd of cows trampling the ground with their hooves, until finally sleep was shaken off, and they struggled to open their eyes, murmuring, "Is it an air raid?" So begins Storm in June. So begins Suite Française by Irene Nemirovsky. The powerful tales of a Russian woman relocated to what she thought was the blessed free society of France, where a Jew could be a citizen since the revolution, where a Jew could embrace European civilization, where you could be French, just like in neighboring Germany. You might consider yourself German first. Only 2 of her 5 books could be written. She perished in the Holocaust in 1942. She began to trace the terror and the true evil of Nazi Germany taking France. And they awoke from their sleep. And the air raids let bombs loose. And Pharaoh pursued them again. There are prophetic verses in this week's parasha, Parashat Beshalach. And the reading of this week's parasha came along with the commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz on Wednesday, this past Wednesday, when it was International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In chapter 14 of Exodus, thinking about Pharaoh metaphorically as the one to enslave and pursue the Jews, the one whose policy was, by law, to throw babies into the Nile River. The Torah reports, Va'amar Paro, after the decision to let Jews go free, after the decision to let Am Yisrael leave Egypt entirely. Va'amar Paro, Pharaoh said, Livnei Yisrael, to those children of Israel, he said to his society, Nivuchim hem ba'aretz, sagar alehem hamidbar. They're confined by our lands. The wilderness has locked them in. Read metaphorically, the lands where Jews find themselves throughout history, right up and through the 20th century. Locked them in, surrounded them, confined them into ghettos. V'chizakti et lev Paro, and Pharaoh's hard heart was hardened more and further. V'radaf achareihem, and he pursued them to their death. Ve'ikavda b'faro v'chol chelo v'yadu Mitzrayim. But this is what happened. I will be glorified through them, says God. And Egypt will know, Ki ani Adonai. I am Adonai, the God of mercy, who must exact judgment. V'yasu chen. And indeed, that is what God did. This is the precursor to the opening up of the Sea of Reeds, to the walls of water standing beside them, and the Jewish people singing through their travels on to the other side of salvation, of redemption, and of reaching Eretz Yisrael, the promised land. God would make it so, as God has implanted the path of righteousness and goodness and humility and cooperation and connectivity and friendship in the hearts and minds and souls of all peoples on the earth. If only we were willing to keep our hearts from being so hardened. We use the example of Pharaoh enslaving the Jewish people as only one example among many times in history that the Jewish people has been chased and closed into ghettos or confined by the lands in which they live so freely even and feel so much a part of. And yet the Torah explains that we must be attentive, prepared, ready, and reaching towards heaven for help at the times that we must leave the very lands we trust. Joseph was a viceroy to Pharaoh in Egypt. The Jewish people settled in Goshen and farmed this fertile delta region of the Nile. Families were created, built up, part of Egyptian society. You could imagine they ate like their neighbors, only kosher. You could imagine their names were a little different, but they all shared the same sun. The river that defined their lives, the shared waterways, the same wildlife. And yet there was a moment when Pharaoh rose and did not know or recognize Joseph, did not recognize the Jewish right to existence, and began the genocidal plan to annihilate the Jewish people both physically and spiritually. Pharaoh pursued them even after he let them go. And these verses, prophetic verses, remind us not just Amalek will rise in every generation, but recognize leaders of the societies in which Jews have found themselves and do find themselves, that they will rise up and they will confine the Jewish people within the boundaries, borders, the wilderness of the societies in which we find ourselves. The Jewish people cannot and must not and will not let such a thing happen. We will not be ghettoized again. We'll take our arms as the Jewish people did when they left Egypt, chapter 13, verse 18. The Jewish people left from Egypt, even if it was a circuitous route that they would have to travel, even if it was not the exact straight line, shortest distance between 2 points from Egypt to the promised land, they left chamushim alu Bnei Yisrael. They left armed and ready to defend themselves. Resistance of the right kind, whether it was Pharaoh who would attack, or Amalek at the back, or other societies and their ethos and cultures and rituals that included child sacrifice. The Jewish people was set on their journey now to bring God's righteousness into full vision of peoples of the earth, into full pictures of how societies could organize and use the expansive rule of law of Torah to supplement the basic ethical understandings and legal notions that societies functioned with, and to insist on removing despotic rulers who have such evil within their hearts and the power of persuasion on their side. Even after they were let go, Pharaoh pursued them. V'chizakti et lev Paro. God said if Pharaoh's direction was to insist on such evil, I will make an example of him and Egyptians for generations to come. And did we not pray for that during the time of Auschwitz, Birkenau? Did we not pray for that salvation during the dark, dark days of the Holocaust? We stand 70 plus years later, 72, a multiple of high. And we assert today not enough was done in order to bomb the rails, convince the Allies, participate in the war effort from the American side. We see what it means when we are left alone in the wilderness. We see what it means when a people is left alone in the wilderness. As genocide was defined post-Holocaust, we have noted times when violent regimes, evil doers, political entities seek to annihilate other peoples, and we must be better about calling them out. Whether it is the Yazidi, whether it is the Uyghurs, whether it is Bosnian Muslims, our heightened attention to protecting all cultures and peoples within the borders and boundaries and confines and the wilderness of the nations who are in power is an essential Jewish responsibility of our time. This is what International Holocaust Remembrance Day reminds us of, that we are again part of that people who survived being chased by the modern Pharaoh. We are a people who not only lift that history and memory and shine the light of those souls who were murdered during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, we are those who will shine the light on this matter in our world, among modern nation states and groups of violent pursuers. We will rise to take that responsibility, to stop genocide in its tracks, to stop the buildup of the potential for mass atrocities and violence, to insist that violent rebellion is not the way to assert an agenda and to work towards peaceful ends among all peoples who should have a place on earth, a cultural heritage of their own, potential to worship, to speak freely, and as we know as Americans, to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. This foundational moment of the redemption from Egypt is the narrative that again and again reminds us that there is redemption even from the darkest hours, from the times when the skies are filled with the air raids overhead, when bombs are dropped and rouse people from their sleep who stop dreaming about water running swiftly over pebbles on the beach. We are awake. We are the ones asking, is it an air raid? Are there pursuers? To protect the lives of the men, the women, and the children who deserve it. The Jewish people has insisted on an International Holocaust Remembrance Day and a commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz as the symbolic liberation of not only the Jewish people, but all peoples who face the tyranny of genocidaires, who are pursued simply because they are who they are and find themselves trapped in the wilderness of those tyrannical places where their lives are threatened. Oh, we wish for the City of Light to have always been full of that light. Oh, we wish that Jerusalem's light, the light of Torah, would shine so brightly over all nations and peoples of the world, so that ultimately we can know a time of great redemption, a time of justice, and a time of true peace. Shabbat Shalom.